Hello and welcome to Narrative4Learning, part of Narrative for Change. Let me tell you a story about a little girl who was born into an area of high social deprivation, into poverty, but she knew she was loved. She knew her mum loved her and she knew her dad loved her. And at night her mum would sing her songs and her mum and her dad would both tell her stories. And they would take her out for picnics into the forests and the parks all around the great city where she was brought up, along with her brother and sister. But her sibling stories are their stories and not hers. Now, she didn't know as a little girl that by doing this, her parents reduced toxic stress and they increased feel-good chemicals for her. But it was a good thing that they did, because being born into poverty is not easy. The dampness in the house caused her to have huge health issues that followed her for the rest of her life. She was born in a little back-to-back, and any of you who are working in foundation years and early years will know the impact of adverse childhood experiences on the later health and cognitive functioning of children. Now, this girl had a problem because when she tried to speak, all of the words came out jumbled. And because of that, she just stopped speaking. She became a selective mute. She went to speech therapy, but it didn't work straight away. And so her school classed her as educationally subnormal because of her communication issues. If they had found some conduit of communication with her, if they had found her letter A, perhaps the school would have realised that in her head there was a whole universe of stories and words and possibilities. But she became more isolated because they kept her back and they labelled her as withdrawn and as shy and as lacking in confidence, which doesn't do much to build a child's confidence. Our words have power and potency in shaping the responses of children. Well, time passed, and in the passing of time, that lovely home became broken and destroyed. But the girl had found books she could read, and she disappeared into books. And she tried on new identities and she found a freedom. She could be a queen, she could be a dragon slayer, she could be a magician of fire. And she started to speak because she had to, because of what was happening at home. And her reports went from saying she's too quiet to actually saying she's way too noisy and she needs to shut up. When she started working with children herself, she started in the late 70s and early 80s to become an adventure play worker. And she got involved in community work and in youth work. And she always used stories, and she added more leaves to her book of knowledge with regards to stories. And then, as you do, she went to live in Ghana in West Africa. And it was when she was living there that she saw the true potency of storytelling as a really powerful tool in development. And she started working and doing consultancy for UNICEF and the United Nations High Commission for Refugees and for the Department for International Development. She spread her wings. And suddenly there was that light bulb moment where she thought, this is why I have led the life that I have led, so that I can explore that passionate heartbeat between stories and people. And she started to research more, all by herself. She never went to university. And for quite a while, this caused her to walk with a limp because she had such a huge chip on her shoulder of resentment about this. But then she started to question the narrative about that as well, and why did it have such a high status? And surely she could manifest herself in different ways without that validation. So she went from being the girl with no voice to becoming the woman who enabled others to find their voice and tell their stories. That's not a bad story, is it? That's me, of course. Thank you very much for listening.